To start our last week of lessons, and what I want you guys to start with is figuring out these two do nows for me. So I want you guys to take a minute and see if you can come up with those answers. So if you want to, pause me. All right, so you should have paused me first to do these two questions. Our very last quiz will be next Monday, and that'll be our last grade for the quarter. So, and questions like this will be on there. So let's take a look at the first one, cos 3 pi over 4. So first off, you say to yourself you have to convert 3 pi over 4 into degrees. So I'm going to multiply by 180 over pi. These will cancel. So I get 3 over 4 times 180. And that's going to make 135 degrees. Okay. So this question really wants me to do cosine 135. So let's graph it. So it's 0, 90, 180. So 135 is somewhere in here. So from here to here is 135. Draw my triangle, right? This is 180. So I'm going to do 180 minus 135, and that's 45 degrees. So if that's 45, then this has to be 45. Now what do we label as 45 degrees? Well, across from it would be radical 2 over 2, radical 2 over 2. All right, now, cosine. Cosine is always what's on the x-axis. So right here. So that's going to be radical 2 over 2. But you have to make sure you do AS. This triangle's in the S quadrant. What does that make cosine? It means this answer has to be negative. And that's the answer to the first one. All right, the second one. We're going to graph tan 210 degrees. So again, 0, 90. 180. So 210 is going to be somewhere here in the third quadrant. I'm going to draw my triangle, right? So if I do 210 minus 180, I get 30. So that means I'm going to make the reference angle 30. This will be 60. Across from 30 is a half. Across from 60 is radical 3 over 2. Now to do tangent, it's y over x. It's sine over cosine. So the y value is a half. The x value is radical 3 over 2. And we're going to do keep, change, flip on this guy. Right? Anytime you have fractions over fractions, you keep the top, change your fraction bar to a times, flip it over. The 2's cancel. So I end up with 1 over radical 3. Uh-oh. Can we leave a radical in the denominator? Nope. So you got to fix it by multiplying by radical 3. So that makes radical 3 over 3. Now, you have to decide if that's a positive answer or a negative answer. Well, then we do A, S, T. Notice this triangle's in the T quadrant. We're doing tangent, so that means it's positive. That was kind of a tricky one. All right, so that's our do now. So what we're going to do today, let me get some of these papers out here, is the last topic we're going to talk about this year. All right, and we're going to be doing basic trig graphs. Okay, and today we're just going to focus on sine and cosine. Now, basic trig graphs are going to be in this format. Y equals A sine bx. Y equals A cosine bx. And what's important to know about this stands for what we call the amplitude. And B is what we call the frequency. Now, we're also going to do one important formula, and that formula is called the period. You're going to need to know this formula. It's 2 pi over the b. So it'll be 2 pi over the frequency. So the best way to show you what's going on is to actually do an example with you guys. So we're going to start off with y equals sine x. All right. Now, every time we do a graph, what we're going to need to know is what is the amplitude, the frequency, and the period. So if I say, what is the amplitude? Okay. The amplitude is always going to be the number in front of sine. What number would be in front of this guy if you don't see one? Very good. The answer is 1. Right? So his amplitude is the number 1. And then I say, what is the frequency? All right, well, the frequency is always going to be the number in front of the x. So that would be a 1 here. And then I'm going to say, what is the period? And then I'm going to show you what all this means. All right, the period is going to be 2 pi over whatever the frequency was. So the period comes out to be 2 pi. All right, so right now this doesn't mean anything to you guys. So what we're going to do is graph this stuff. Now, when you do graphs, it all comes off of the unit circle. So right here, I'm going to draw a unit circle. Circle. This is a point here, that's the point 1, 0. This point here is 0, 1. This point here is negative 1, 0. So anytime you have to graph, we're going to use the unit circle and the fact that this is 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. Okay. Now, when we graph, all we're going to do is graph the unit circle. First, the biggest y value we see is the number 1, and the smallest y value we see is negative 1. So when we graph these guys, I'm going to go 1 and negative 1. Notice my amplitude is 1. That's not a coincidence. So your amplitude tells us how high and how low we're going to go. Now, frequency is 1. That means I'm going to make 1 trip around the circle. All right? Now, when I label my x-axis, you're going to label it in radians. So 0 degrees is 0, 90 degrees. So instead of putting 90 degrees here, we're going to use radians, and that's pi over 2. 180, this would be 2 pi over 2, which reduces just to be pi. 270 is 3 pi over 2. And 360 would be 4 pi over 2 or 2 pi. Now we're taking 1 trip around the circle, right? Notice what the period is. Notice what the last thing was I wrote on here. 1 trip around the circle means we should stop at 2 pi. That's what the period tells us. Now watch how the graph is going to work. We're graphing sine. Sine is always the y value on the unit circle. So at 0 degrees, what's the y value worth? 0. So put it down, 0. 90 degrees, that's at 1. 180, the y value is 0. 270, the y value is negative 1. And at 360, the y value is 0 again. Then I'm going to connect that because it's basically the unit circle script shown on paper. That is the sine curve. Voila. Okay, so now we're going to try that again with cosine. Let's do y equals cosine x. And what I'd like you to find is the amplitude, the frequency, and the period. All right, so take a second and see if you can find those 3 numbers for me. Amplitude is always going to be the absolute value of the number out in front, so that's 1. The frequency is always the number in front of the x, 1. And the period is always 2 pi over the b, the frequency. So it's going to be 2 pi. All right, so what I want to do with you guys now is the cosine curve. So we're always going to do the same setup here. We're going to do one trip around the circle. That's what the frequency means. How many times we're going around the unit circle? We're going around once. So we're going to do, let me get the unit circle out here. All right, so here's my unit circle. 0, 90, but you're going to label it pi over 2. That's what 90 degrees is. 180 is always pi. 270 is 3 pi over 2. Look, it's the third line, guys. 3 pi over 2. And this guy would be 2 pi. Okay. And my amplitude is 1. So that means I'm going up to 1 and down to negative 1. All right, now when we go to graph it, this time we're doing cosine. Cosine, if you go to the point, is always the x value. What is the x value at that point? 1. Okay. Go to 90. What's the x value at that point? 0. 180 would be negative 1. 270, the x value is 0. And at 360, it's 1. So now if I connect those, you always want to make them curvy because the circle's curvy. That is what the cosine curve looks like. So you guys won't have to do any graphing yet for homework. But what we're going to practice now is finding some information. All right. So I'm going to give you y equals 3 sine 2x. All right. From this, I want you to find the amplitude, the amp, the frequency, and the period. All right, take a minute and see if you could find those 3 things for me. The amplitude will always be the absolute value of the number in front, so that's going to be 3. The frequency is the number in front of the x, okay? And the period is 2 pi over the frequency, which is 2. So that will cancel, so that guy's pi. Now let's talk about what this means, right? The amplitude means the graph goes up to 3 and down to negative 3. So you see here how the amplitude was 1 and the graph went up to 1 and it went down to negative 1, right? The frequency is trips around the unit circle. Okay? So notice here the frequency is 1 and we did 1 trip around the unit circle. If we needed to graph this, which we'll do at some point, we're going to go around the unit circle twice. And the period tells us the length of one cycle. So for example, in this one, we had to make 1 trip around the unit circle. Where did the picture end? 2 pi. But if we have to make 2 trips around the unit circle in the same amount of space, that means that it would squish together and we'd be done by pi to get 2 of them in. But we're not going to handle that today. All we're going to work on today is can you find these 3 things? Okay, so what if I give you y equals negative 2 cos 4x? Right? And I want you to find the amplitude, the frequency, and the period. Right? So take a minute and see if you can find those 3 things. Okay. Well, the amplitude needs to be the absolute value of that number. So the answer is going to be 2. Okay. The frequency is 4. And the period is going to be 2 pi over 4. So you always want to reduce this. So the period is going to be pi over 2. Okay. What if I say, what is the range of y equals 4 cos x? All right, so let's talk about what this question means. What is the range? Range means how low does something go to how high does it go. So if I go back up to this picture, the lowest this went down to is -1, and the highest it went up to is 1. So for this picture, the range would be -1 to 1. Now let's talk about this one. So here the amplitude is 3. That means the range for this guy, it means it would go down to -3. And it's always the y value for range. And it would go up to 3. Okay? So keeping that in mind, what would this range be? Well, that means the amplitude would be 4. That means we're going to go down 4 and we're going to go up 4. So the range is going to be -4 less than or equal to y, less than or equal to 4. Right, similar idea. Okay. Well, we get a fresh piece of paper. What if I say, what is the maximum value of y equals -5 cos 3x? Take a second and see what you would come up with for that one. Okay, well, the amplitude would be the absolute value, right? So that'd be 5. So the amplitude tells me how low I go and how high I go. So this means this would go down to -5, would be 5. All right, one more. What is the minimum value of y equals, I don't know, 7 sine 2x? Right? So take a minute and see if you can come up with that one. Okay. So anytime they ask for a range, max or min, it's the amplitude I need. Right? So if the amplitude is 7, this means I'm going to go up to 7 and then I'm going to go down to -7. So what would the minimum value be? Well, the minimum then that this graph would reach would be -7. All right, so all you have to do for now is identify maximum, minimum, amplitude, frequency, period, and then we're going to put it over all together and we're going to do more with these.